To recap from the last class, we talked about information. Yes, this is why there was a delay. To recap, we talked about information society from the last class. All right. Okay, here we go again. To recap from the last class, we talked about information society. We established that information can hurt, but information can also protect. We also discussed why we think it is called information society now. It is mainly because of the internet, which allows powerless individuals, a single individual, to access, to reach the same breadth and depth of people as powerful companies and governments can do with their information. Individual cannot reach everybody, reach all the people physically. At least the individual's information can reach as many people as governments and companies can reach. So there is more information everywhere because everybody is a publisher. A single YouTube video can reach millions and billions if it's made well. There is more information everywhere because everybody is a researcher now. With powerful search engines, you can get information as fast, as efficiently as I can on any topic you like. You can even do it better if you are fast with your fingers and if you are smart in coming up with smart search terms. So there is more information that people are getting out, and there is more information that people are accessing. That's why it's called information society. Not information state, not information school, not information age, but information society, because everybody can do it. And it is due to the power of the internet. So we already established that information can hurt as well as protect. So information given out by terrorists can coax young people into terrorism. False information ruining someone's reputation can hurt that person's life forever. But also, information allows all of us to fight against terrorism, to fight against false information designed to hurt all of us. So there is information everywhere, and there is more information everywhere. So the question that we try to address through this class is what ethical stance we will going to take. How will we live our lives with this much more information everywhere? Now, we also talked about, so this is how we talked about information society. We also talked about ethics. We talked about typical situation where ethical thinking goes in, walking down a street and giving money to a beggar. Okay, then maybe ethical or unethical, but that's not just personal ethics, because we already have a system where we force ourselves to give money, cough up our income for the less privileged, for their survival. So much of our law and policy already reflects our personal ethical thinking. The fact that you live in a country where welfare is provided to the poor or disabled, the less fortunate, already means that you are forced to live with the same ethical view that made you help out a beggar on the street. So we will have to look into the law to talk about ethics, because if we are 140 people stranded on an unmanned island, and if we are completely strangers, we can just talk about ethics. We can build our own rules. But that's not the case. We are born into a society that has gone on for quite a while already. You cannot opt out of a society that you are born into. There is no hypothetical clean slate that we can start from. We have to talk about ethics, we have to deal with the rules and laws that we live under, and we are forced to live under because of the fact that we are born into that society. So the first law that we looked into in the last class was constitutions. So one of the most important provision that has something to do with the information in our Constitution is the provision on freedom of speech. Almost all constitutions of modern democracies or systems claiming to be democracies have this provision, freedom of speech. It doesn't have freedom of physical actions. It doesn't have freedom to do somersault. It doesn't have freedom to walk backwards. It doesn't have freedom to smoke. It doesn't have freedom to drink, but it has freedom to speak. And freedom of speech includes people's right to know, people's right to access information as well. What is speech? Speech is publishing, giving out information, right? And then it also includes people's right to access information as well. If a book is banned in a country, it doesn't hurt just the publisher of the book, it also hurts the people who wanted to read the books that are just banned. So we call it freedom of speech, but if you look at it, because it has both sides, both publishing but also accessing the information, we might as well call it freedom of information. So freedom of information is guaranteed in almost all countries' books. I'm not going to say guaranteed actually. I'm not going to say actually guaranteed in all countries, because I'm not sure whether freedom of speech is guaranteed in Korea. But at least the book says it should be guaranteed. That is our ethical stance on information. Well, wait a minute. We said information can hurt, information can also protect. How come we have these provisions that protect freedom of information if it can hurt as well as benefit us? If it's such a neutral thing, why do we have these laws that only focus on the beneficial side of information? So we talked about what possible reasons could justify protecting freedom of speech. One of us said democracy. Yes, information allows people to monitor and criticize the people who are elected to be their representatives. And information is sometimes the only way to do it because, democracy, as long as the election is over, cuts formal power away from people and turns it over to the elected officials. Elected officers hold the sole power of the state that can be forced upon the entire people. So, information. So, talking, criticizing any official misconduct and getting information about official misconduct. That is sometimes the only way to make sure that the government remains democratic after and in between elections. So it's very important for democracy. But there are many forms of speech that have nothing to do with the democracy, right? Pornography. That's not about, virtues of democracy. That's not about, being the true agents or true owners of your country. So some other students in this class said maybe because speech is expression of feelings and thoughts. And feelings and thoughts are what divide us human beings from animals. So thoughts and feelings are actually the essence of humanity, right? Being able to eat, being able to run, that's not the essence of humanity because those things animals can do just as well. But being able to think and feel the delicate thoughts and feelings represented by all those books and songs and YouTube videos that you watch can be done only by sentient beings like humans. Okay, so maybe that's why we need to protect freedom of information, because it is expression of thoughts and feelings. But then again, it's not just information that reflects humanity, right? It's also physical act that can represent people's thoughts and feelings. By dancing, right? You express yourselves. By painting, by moving your arms with your painting tools, you express yourself. By building huge churches, sculptures, you express yourself. But those physical actions are not as well protected as freedom of speech, even though they represent and they are equivalent to expressions of humanity. To speak, you don't need a license from anybody. But to build a building, you need a license. to engage in many other physical actions like wearing a gun, you need a license. Or you may say, hey, it's my expression of self-reliance to wear a handgun on my waist. Then maybe an expression, then maybe expression of humanity, but as long as it's a physical action, it is not as strongly protected as speech talking about right to bear arms. So why is speech or why is information protected more strongly than physical action? Democracy? Because it is expression of humanity? Why is that? So I proposed this new justification for protecting information, which is that speech is intellective. Speech does not cause effects by itself. It's mediated through the response of the listener of that speech. If I say, let's kill all the, anything can come in the bracket, but let's just say elephants. My saying, let's kill all the elephants, does not actually kill the elephants. Only the ones who already have built-in hate, built-in compulsion to kill elephants will be actually moved by my call for action. My advocacy will work only with the people willing to and welcoming my advocacy. And also, if someone calls me if someone calls me with a certain epithet, usually designated to Asians, it can hurt me only if I think it is disrespectful to me. But there are many times that using epithets are received as signs of affection. Let me give you examples. So, if you see movies, many times, African American males usually call one another niggers for expressing affection. But if a nigger is uttered by some white public official, he or she will have to step down, will be under heavy criticism. Even among gays, the epithets used against the gays are also used very well among gay men themselves to express affections for one another. Depending on how it's used and to whom it's used, speech can either insult or sometimes show affection. So again, speech does not cause effects by itself, but speech's effect is mediated through how the listener responds to that speech. So speech is interactive, and because of this interactive nature of speech, some of the worst forms of speech is protected by freedom of information, and you read about it. If you didn't read for the first class, probably you have read about it by today, because now it's the second class, in the case of Zundel. Zundel is a neo-Nazi who has written everywhere, online and offline, that the Holocaust has never happened. He lives in Europe. He used to live in Europe. He ran away from prosecution of the German police because in Germany there is a crime called the denial of Holocaust. Okay? You can deny existence of UFO. You can deny many historical facts. It will not be a crime. But if you deny the fact that the Holocaust has ever happened, it is a crime, and you can serve long years in prison for uttering that. So he is in Canada. He ran away from prosecution. And he's continuing with his spreading of the messages, the false messages about Holocaust. And he is caught by the Canadian police for what we call false news provision, or crime of spreading falsity. So, what did the Supreme Court say? Let's look at the case itself. Okay. Now, the document looks long, but if you are smart about it, if you just read the parts that are boldened, that would have done you good enough for this class. So let's take a look at it. From the start, let's read the part. Well, how many of you have the case in front of you, either in paper form or in form of the notebook computer? Anyone? All right, only a very few. Okay, then I'll assume that most of you have read it and have committed to your memory substantial parts of the decision. Let me just read some of the relevant parts. To permit the imprisonment of people or even the threat of imprisonment on the ground that they have made a statement, which 12 of their co-citizens, it's the jury, deemed to be false and mischievous to some undefined, or deemed to be false, okay, false, and therefore mischievous to the public interest, is to stifle a whole range of speech, some of it which has long been regarded as legitimate and even beneficial to our society. So the assumption is that some of the false speech is actually legitimate and beneficial to our society. And the Supreme Court Justice says, I do not assert that Parliament cannot criminalize dissemination of racial slurs and hate propaganda, but I assert that such provisions must be drafted with a sufficient particularity to offer assurance that they cannot be abused so as to stifle a broad range of legitimate and valuable speech. So what are the false speech? Okay, what are the false speech that can be beneficial to the society? All right, can anyone give an example? What false speech? Okay, is there anyone who claims to have never lied? So all of you have lied once or twice. All right? Is it for your benefit? Probably you lied for your own benefit. But a lot of lies for your benefit, for the speaker's benefit, usually hurts other people. But are there times that you lied, not just for your benefit, but for the benefit of people around you? Anyone? I do that kind of lie about once every 3 weeks when my wife comes back from a hair job and asks whether the hair is done nice. And I always say, it looks beautiful. It's beneficial for me, beneficial for her, it's for beneficial for our intramural peace as well. There are many other times that false information can be beneficial. Okay? Now, before we go into that, let's look at some other parts of the decision. The justice also says the question of falsity of a statement is often a matter of debate, particularly where historical facts are at issue. Historians have written extensively on the difficulty of ascertaining what actually occurred in the past, given the difficulty of verification and the selective and sometimes revisionist versions. Different witnesses and historians may accord to the same events. That history can be written differently depending on by whom has been famously shown by who? Anyone has studied history? Has majors in history? Edward Carr, E.H. Carr, in his book, What is History? There, he says, he coins the phrase, history is written by who? Victors, right? Winners. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that phrase toward the end of the class. But So history is full of interpretation. There's no clear line between false and truth, falsity and truth. And does anyone major in philosophy? Anyone? How about science? How many of you major in science? If you don't major in philosophy, if you don't major in science, what are you doing in school? Well, there is this field called philosophy of science. And at least the classical part of philosophical science, the classical part of that field is dedicated to deciding what qualifies as truth. There are people writing books about what is the condition of truth. If the sun has risen from the east 1,000 million times, is it also an absolutely true statement that the sun always rises from the east? Well, that is considered a fallacy. That's one example of, so the idea is that the inductive logic does not result, inductive logic does not result in substantive truth, only approximation or only postulate, only guesses or best guesses based on the data available. And then the justice goes through, the Supreme Court justice goes through many arguments that are raised against the Mr. Zunder's Holocaust denial. Some of the arguments are that it is hate speech, but the Supreme Court justice does not think it is hate speech. On that argument, let's not spend too much time because we are not here to study hate speech itself. But toward the end, or toward the middle, the Supreme Court justice takes on an argument that deliberate lies should be punishable, right? The false information that the speaker knows to be true, knows to be false. And on that, he says, it's on page 11 if you have the document. The first difficulty results from the premise that deliberate lies can never have value. Exaggeration, even clear falsification, may arguably serve useful social purposes linked to the values underlying freedom of expression. A person fighting cruelty against animals may knowingly cite false statistics, in pursuit of his or her beliefs and with the purpose of communicating a more fundamental message. For instance, the message that cruelty to animals is increasing Well, so the example of the statement, example of a deliberately false statement to promote her fundamental message. One example is this, quote, cruelty to animals is increasing and must be stopped. While cruelty to animals may not be increasing, but some of the campaigners may just deliberately say that to raise people's awareness. Also, a doctor, in order to persuade people to be inoculated against a burgeoning epidemic, may exaggerate the number or geographical location of persons potentially infected with the virus. Yes, a doctor may say, hundreds of thousands of people are affected by Zika virus, to warn people into better preparing against the epidemic. One of my friends who had a planned trip to Singapore just canceled it because her friend, a civil servant in Singapore, told her that if she comes, she'll catch it. She'll catch Zika virus. Well, it can be a deliberate lie, but it does serve some purpose for it has served some beneficial purpose for my friend. An artist, for artistic purposes, may make a statement that a particular society considers both an assertion of fact and a manifestly deliberate lie. Consider the case of Salman Rushdie's satanic verses, viewed by many Muslim societies as perpetrating deliberate lies against the Prophet Muhammad. All of these expressions, right? The artist, Salman Rushdie, the animal rights campaigner, or the doctor campaigning against the epidemic. All their expressions have intrinsic value in fostering political participation and individual self-fulfillment. And let me give you some more examples that the Supreme Court Justice talks about. Give me a second. Okay, on page 27, okay. So if you're in a document in front of you, please go home, make sure you read page 10, 11, and page 12, 2, page 27 of the Zunder case. Should an activist be prevented from saying, quote, the rainforest of British Columbia is being destroyed, unquote, because she fears criminal prosecution for spreading false news in the event that scientists conclude that a jury accepts that the statement is false and it is likely to cause mischief to the British Columbia forest industry. Okay. Rainforest activist, you know, the environmental activist who wants to protect rainforest, may say rainforest of British Columbia is being destroyed when actually there is no rainforest in British Columbia. It's a deliberately false statement. But should she be punished because it may cause harm to the forest industry? Should a concerned citizen fear prosecution for stating in the course of political debate about nuclear power plant in her neighborhood, in the course of political debate, just because he says a nuclear power plant in the neighborhood is destroying the health of the children living nearby? He may not have any basis for saying it, but just because it is a deliberately false information, just because he doesn't know, he doesn't have enough basis for saying this, should he be shut up by the state? Should he shut up in fear of the possibility that science later proves that the nuclear power plant actually has not caused any damage on the children? Should a medical professional be precluded from describing an outbreak of meningitis as an epidemic for fear that a government or private organization proves that it has not reached the level of epidemic? Should a member of an ethnic minority whose brothers are being persecuted abroad be prevented from stating that the government has systematically ignored his friends' plight? The justice says these examples suggest there is merit in an argument that false news provision poses greater danger to minority interest groups worthy of popular support that it offered, or greater danger to minority interest groups worthy of popular support. So, I just gave you one example of how really false statement like the Holocaust has never happened can be protected by freedom of information. And believe it or not, that's the status of international law as it stands right now. So international human rights law, there's really no world government, right? So it is difficult to figure out exactly what international law is. When it comes to international human rights law, there are two bodies that are more responsible than others for creating the body of international human rights law. One is UN Human Rights Committee, and one is Human Rights Council. It sounds similar, but they are wildly different animals. UN Human Rights Committee is more like a judicial body. It is a body of experts, like law professors like me, who objectively look at human rights situations of different member countries. Not all the UN members, but the member countries that participate or ratify the Human Rights Treaty. Well, there are about 10 main human rights treaties. I'm not going to go through them all, but when people say human rights treaty, they're usually talking about International Covenant, UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. You don't need to write it down. It will be all on your blackboard, online blackboard. And UN Human Rights Council, that's not really a judicial body, it's more like a legislative body, in a sense that it is the governments themselves that constitute the Human Rights Council. So they also deliberate upon the human rights status of all the countries. But think about it. I mean, it is a intergovernmental body. What do you think the US will say about human rights in China? What do you think Chinese government will say? The status of human rights in other countries. What do you think Arab countries will say about human rights status in Palestine, right? It's all politicized. So for me, I mean, some scholars may disagree, more objective assessment of human rights, the more dependable source of human rights law is UN Human Rights Committee decisions. And UN Human Rights Committee has time and again has taken a view that this law called false news provision, or the crime of spreading falsity, is itself violation against the human right. Because many governments around the world, many authoritarian governments, many dictatorial governments have legislated this crime of spreading falsity to protect the regimes from the criticism of the people wishing for more democracy, wishing for more truth. So the crime of spreading falsity sounds like it sounds as if it's designed to protect truth, but has been a tool to actually suppress truthful calls for democracy and human rights in many countries. There's another a very bad form of speech that has been protected by freedom of speech or freedom of information. That is speech that is insult. Okay. All that is, let's just say insult. I'll put online another case for you to read. The case of Kuocw. So back in 60s and 70s, in the US, when the US was at war with Vietnam, people were forcefully taken into custody to be sent into military services. We call it draft. And think about it. I mean, would you say Americans are the most individualistic people of the whole world? Okay, it doesn't matter. Think about it. But, you know, American ideals are very strongly built on the concept of free individuals. And imagine the government trying to force them not just into forced labor, but forced war against other people. So forcing these free individuals into a situation where you either have to kill others or die. Imagine the level of anger among American public against the draft. One of the people subject of the draft expressed his anger by writing on his jacket, a jacket like mine, a phrase, "fuck the draft," F-U-C-K, the draft. He was caught by the local police for causing public disorder. Because, people will look at him, right? Because it is a statement directly against the war effort of the United States government. Hundreds of thousands of young people are dying to win this war. And here's one guy who doesn't want to participate in the war, not only refuses to participate in the war, but is undermining the efforts of the US government. So a lot of reason to arrest him for the government. The US Supreme Court struck down his conviction and set him free on the following argument. Number one, speech plays two different roles. One is conveying of discrete information, but the other is expression of feelings. Number two, some of the feelings are so closely tied to certain words, certain phrases, certain expressions, that sometimes you have to use that expression to express that feeling or that thought. Basically, the Supreme Court is saying, if he has written on the jacket, I don't like the draft, that is completely different feeling from a phrase that says, fuck the draft. Would you agree that different feelings are expressed? And that if the term fuck is not used, he'll not be able to speak out his anger at the system? Okay. And third, the Supreme Court says, if you try to ban use of certain words just because they are offensive to other people, because certain feelings can be conveyed only by those words, banning those words means banning those feelings, and that's the start of mind control. And it is, and his conviction, his sentence is struck down. So you can see the example of how insult can have, even insulting language, epithets, can have different meanings for different people. People who are offended by the four-letter word fuck, in the vicinity of Cohen, may have been offended, but for a lot of other people who are also angry that the government is forcing its own young people into death to keep their political influence in some other foreign countries, for them it was a very important message that they themselves could not publish. So insulting language is generally protected by freedom of information. I told you that Human Rights Committee, UN Human Rights Committee has ruled against crime of spreading falsity several times. It also has ruled against the crime of insult so many times that it has issued what I call, well, what I will put online, General Comment 34. In General Comment 34, the Supreme Court, the UN Human Rights Committee says, a state shall not punish a statement that's not subject to verification. What are the statements that are not subject to verification? Statements of opinion, statements of feelings, that Professor Park is handsome. Is that subject to verification? No. Okay. That it has rained a lot today, that's not subject to verification. So many statements are not subject to verification, and you cannot be punished for statements of feelings and opinions. So insulting language itself is taken out of the punishable range of speech. Then we keep talking about what speech is protected or what kind of information is protected. Then when can it be punished? When is it not subject to protection? Right? What are the situations where information itself, without, not accompanied by any physical action, can be punished? If you remember from Zunder, the Supreme Court case, remember the justice said, oh, okay, we are striking down this law, we are striking down the crime of spreading falsity, but we are not against punishing racial slurs, hate speech. Why is hate speech punishable? What's the difference between other forms of insulting language and hate speech? So there are times that speech can be, or information can be punished, and one form of such speech is defamation. What is defamation? Lowering one person's reputation, okay, lowering one person's reputation by spreading false information about that person. So this person, this is a movie. This is a scene from a movie called Larry Flint. Larry Flint is a publisher of adult magazine, and he has been the subject of many prosecutions for obscenity. The state governments, politicians hated him, especially Christian ones, and they influenced the prosecutors and the police to put him in jail many times for selling adult magazines, which are by now, which have now become really established adult magazine. Now, in amidst of that, Larry Flynn fought back by taking out a fake advertisement in his own adult magazine called Hustler. I know some of you know this magazine. Hustler so in Hustler he took out a fake advertisement that said Jerry Falwell. So the person you see, he's an actor, but he's playing the role of Jerry Falwell. And Jerry Falwell had his first sex with his mother. It was a fake advertisement. It's a parody on the advertisement for hard liquor brand called Campari. Okay, it's sold very well around the world, and many of the Campari advertisements talk about the first time a person had Campari, right? So Bill Gates had his first shot of Campari by the ocean side of Seattle, right? And picture of Bill Gates sipping Campari. That's usually the advertisement. And Larry Flint made a parody of the advertisement featuring Jerry Falwell, saying, he had his first sex with his mother. So basically, Larry Flynn just wanted to insert the whole Christian movement, trying to destroy him and his adult business. So Jerry Falwell sued for defamation, and this is a clip from the movie depicting the defamation trial. Okay, let's see whether you can hear it. Okay, so this is a very legally educational clip here. Basically, Edward Norton, the lawyer, is a lawyer for Larry Flynn, butters up Jerry Falwell and talks about how greatly he is admired by other people. And the lawyer suddenly asks, have you had sex with your mother? And he says, absolutely not. So what do you think about the fake advertisement that Hustler says you had sex with your mother? And he says, well, absolutely offensive. And the lawyer asks, so do you think that people reading the magazine will believe that you had sex with your mother? And he says, absolutely not. I don't think people will believe because because I have been so very well admired. So Edward Norton takes out the text of the law. Actually, it's a jury instruction. I'll let you know what jury instruction is later. And Edward Norton reads, if no reasonable person will believe the falsity of the statement, then there is no defamation, because your reputation, or speaking from my perspective, my reputation is not in my heart, it's not in my brain, it resides in other people's thoughts. And if their evaluation of me is not affected by the false information that has been spread, then there is no defamation. Defamation is the composite word of D and fame, right? So there is no lowering of my fame, right? So only those statements, only those false statements about a person that reasonable person will believe to be true constitute defamation. So these are the situations when speech and information can be punished and will still not be human rights violation. I'm going to talk more about this. Now, I'm going to start putting more material online on the blackboard. Some of them are just links to online material. Please read them, and we'll have a debate in the next class. We'll cut the class into halves and have debate on hate speech against women and hate speech against men. For those of you who want to know more, think Meghalaya. Okay, Google. It might be a good opportunity for you to read about Korean society. Thank you.